Well, thank you, Congressman Burgess, for joining us. I have a son who's a horned frog, by the way, and I know Tarrant County is part of your domain. Yeah, right. That's right. All right, very good. But thank you for joining. And thanks to IPI as well for putting together what I hope for you has been a pretty interesting morning. I represent the Wireless Association, work for CTIA. For those of you who may not be aware, we represent all the major service providers in the country. All the major suppliers, international and here in the United States. This might be the only time that you're, in fact, in a public forum and you're encouraged to have your cell phone go off. So if you want to take it off mute, certainly feel free to use it, text, email, whatever you would like, but never, of course, while you're driving. So that would be great. You know, I had a chance to meet Anand probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, I think it was. And I think what I find interesting about him and WellDocs is that they really do personify what's going on in our environment right now in terms of innovation and in terms of this exciting development. Because he was on really first generation of what you're up to in terms of product and service. Now here they are up to the third iteration of what they're doing and what they're offering. Dick Katz, he and I met probably a year ago, first talking about the mobile EKG project and what they're doing over at GW in this space, and having an opportunity now to trial mobile technology and a chance to narrow that time in which emergency care is provided at a very critical time, cardiac care. It's like a 90-minute window. I think we talk about the golden hour, and have a chance to reduce that by 20 minutes. Think how many lives that has the potential of saving. And then the scale, when you take it outside of DC, if it works, and we think it will, to Chicago and LA and across this country, 300 million people, and the number of cardiac patients we have every day suffering this kind of terrible event, and a chance to save lives, and that's great progress. And now look at AT&T and what they're doing, one of our leaders in terms of mobile health, but all of our service providers actually, Verizon, T-Mobile, Sprint, AT&T, all very extremely involved and engaged in mobile health because they see the excitement and the opportunity and the benefit that it can provide. We did a survey about a year and a half ago with Harris Interactive, and we looked at patients and we talked to doctors and specialists. We talked about mobile health, just in terms of just in general interest to show you what an idea of what people are thinking about out there. About 80% of the consumer side said they're very interested in learning about mobile health, and about half of them said they would consider changing their health plan, their insurance plan, if it had a component that covered mobile health within their reimbursement program. We're not there yet, but it certainly shows what's on the public's mind. From the physician standpoint, about a quarter of them who were surveyed said they thought their patients today would benefit from mobile health, and about 90% of the specialists encouraged more investment in that space. So you can see it on the consumer side. Certainly we see it within the medical community. There's great interest there to generate more activity. We think that's a very good start. I think Eleanor mentioned 10,000 applications right now. That has grown exponentially in just 1 year. And we can't wait to see where we're going to be a year from now in that space because of the innovation that's present. We think chronic disease is certainly a ripe territory in terms of what mobile health can provide right now. If it's estimated that if 45% of the Americans who suffer from at least one chronic disease, which Anand said was 7 out of every 10, if 45% of them would agree to just remote monitoring alone, the cost savings per year is estimated to be $21 billion. That's $21 billion out of $1.4 trillion or approximately $1.4 trillion that we spend every year in chronic disease treatment. That's no small drop in the bucket. There's a great potential in machine-to-machine communication. Some estimates are talking about 430 million shipments of units by the year 2013, just in machine-to-machine communication. So again, great innovation, great development going on in that space, and these are just estimates. And so far, everything that we've seen to date has been conservative because we keep surpassing the milestones or the estimates that were made 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. The problem, though, and this is what really is at the center of what we're all about right now at CTIA, the problem is spectrum. We're talking about extremely intensive applications here, bandwidth-intensive applications that require a lot of data. The spectrum is a finite resource. We only have so much of it. We can't make more of it, and spectrum is available. We think there's some really good opportunities to expand what certainly is currently available to carriers, but we have to have spectrum. We have to have the air. You look at it like highways, and think about it in those terms. We have highways in this country. They have a number of lanes to them that accommodate a certain amount of traffic. Well, spectrum, that's our highways. Those are our lanes. And we know we have a lot more traffic coming than we currently have. Cisco's estimating that by the year 2015, the amount of data that is being carried over United States networks will be 40 to 50 times what it was in the year 2009. So we're talking about a 50 times increase of data. And you go, wow, that sounds like a lot. Well, how much are we carrying today? We have doubled our data traffic in the United States from the second half of last year from the first half of last year. So we doubled the amount of data that we carried on U.S. networks. So how much was that? Well, I see Bob Roche over here as our Vice President of Research at CTIA, and he likes to throw a lot of facts and figures at me about megabytes and gigabytes and terabytes and all these things. I said, Bob, translate this for me. How much data are we talking about here? He said, if you took the entire book catalog collection of the Library of Congress and digitized it, we would be sending across U.S. networks that amount of data 2 times every hour of every day in the year. That's how much data is currently being transmitted over United States networks. And we're talking about a 40 or 50 times increase of that by the year 2015. So there's no question that we need to have more spectrum. The FCC's on top of that. The administration's also supportive of the National Broadband Plan. Within that broadband plan, the FCC has called for 300 megahertz of spectrum to be allocated within the next 5 years. An additional 200 megahertz to be allocated in the 5 years following that. So 500 megahertz over the next 10 years. The administration's behind that, as I said. There's great congressional support behind that. The industry certainly supports that. We think we'll need more. By our estimates, we're looking at probably needing 700 to 800 megahertz of spectrum within that same period of time. But 500 would be a really great step in the right direction. Now, where do we start? Where do we find it? Because again, it's a finite resource. There's only so much of it. We think that there's certainly some spectrum inventory legislation that makes a lot of sense. Right now, I think there isn't a great grip on exactly who is using what in terms of spectrum. We think there's probably some waste going on within government use that could be looked at and examined, and perhaps restructuring some of that. We think the broadcasters certainly have a vast amount of underused and unused spectrum that we'd like to put to much greater use. They would beg to differ with that. Many of you are probably familiar with a little bit of a dispute that we're having in terms of the broadcasters. But it's interesting that there are so many people aligned on one side of that issue, and then we think there's another side that is really trying to almost desperately cling to the past by scaring us about what's going to happen tomorrow. The fact is local TV is not going away. We're talking about a voluntary incentive auction. This is only going to be for broadcasters who voluntarily offer their spectrum for sale. And we've had a white paper that we produced with the Consumer Electronics Association. It estimated that that spectrum would bring in somewhere around $35 to $36 billion to the U.S. Treasury. Now think about what's going on right here today and what we're talking about in terms of budget and debt ceiling and the kinds of deficits that we're talking about. And we are talking about adding 30-some-odd billion dollars to the U.S. Treasury for the right then to develop and innovate within that space. Now, we've even offered $3 billion of that to go to the broadcasters to pay for repacking and to pay them for the spectrum that they're giving up, an asset that they're giving up voluntarily. So we think that's a win-win. A win to the broadcasters, it takes care of their needs. A great win to the U.S. Treasury, because it certainly addresses what is a growing problem here in the United States. The fact is we're swallowed right now in red ink, and we have a chance to put a dent into that. And we think we also have an opportunity to fuel what is certainly this virtuous cycle of innovation. It was touched on earlier. It really starts with spectrum, which fuels innovation and investment, which leads to new devices, which leads to consumer service, creates more demand, and that takes us right back to spectrum. It creates new jobs, it creates great economic growth, and we think it's a win across the board. We're talking about fantastic applications that are occurring right now in mobile health. But what we want to do is we want to take that wow and make it tomorrow's now, that it's happening all of the time. It's routine and regular. And we think we can make it happen, but spectrum has to be allocated right now for the industry in order to get us all to where we really deserve to be. So thank you.